I do that percentage,
Okay.
but once it loads, you can close it.
I didn't see that. Jay?
So that's why I wanted to, that's when we created earlier.
Tori, I know we're down a few.
Just close it.
Party buns?
Was it yesterday? All right, yeah.
Very good.
George,
Made it work. I think I told you about my double header. As soon as I'm finished tonight, I'm on the election commission because I'm the smaller attorney. They had to move there. They moved to They all from county election. So, I'll be getting on to Charleston. What I told them, I said, nobody can leave. You always want to set the trade office and make it. Okay, we ready?
The diaspora.
yeah. Who's next? There's a lot of photos.
Everybody get ready? No rush. Go ahead. Okay, we'll call this meeting order. Welcome to the February 22nd, 2023 VAR large meeting here at the Clinic Project Meeting Room. My name is John Robinson, and I'm the chairman for this afternoon and evening. The other board members present with me today are Stephen Brown and Louis Subject. City staff present are Tori Parrish and Lawrence Courtney. All applications that we will be reviewing tonight have had to meet certain standards. The applicants have been required to submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Staff controls the slideshow. All the applicant needs to do is to tell Lawrence or Tori what slide you want them to go to. The slide presentation will consist of everything that was submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants are required to give their name and their affiliation with the project when speaking. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed by the City of Charleston and is available on YouTube. Your appearance here is your consent to be recorded. The order of the meeting is as follows for each presentation. Tori will first do an introduction and overview of the project for the benefit of the applicant and the public and the board. This is followed by the applicant's presentation, which has a 10-minute time limit unless extended by the chair, together with any questions of the applicant by the board or staff. As I mentioned before, any and all presenters, be they the architect, developer, or other parties, should speak during this portion of the meeting and identify themselves and their affiliation with the project. This is followed by the public comment period. Any person with us this evening who wishes to speak on any agenda item is welcome to do so. There's a 2-minute time limit. The public comments should be germane to the purview of this board. You can ask for an extension if need be. Anyone wishing to speak should please supply their name and address. Written public comment is always acceptable to the board. Any written public comment had to be submitted by noon yesterday to be considered by the board. I was informed by Ms. Parrish a little while ago that we had received no written public comment, so there will be nothing to digest there. The public comment period is followed by city staff comments and recommendations. And after this, the applicant is given the opportunity to respond to either the public comments and or the city staff comments or recommendations. That response time should be limited to 5 minutes. The applicant does not have to use the time if they do not feel it is necessary. Brevity is encouraged. This is followed by board discussion and a potential vote on each agenda item. The applicant presentation is over at this point. Public comment is closed. The applicant may clarify information when recognized by the chair by raising a hand and waiting to be called upon. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and their vote on a motion, with the exception of the minutes. I will reread a motion verbatim. Board members should correct any mistake that I made in that motion so that it is an accurate motion. Once a motion is in proper order and seconded, each member voting should say yea, in favor, or nay, not in favor. Results of tonight's meeting are available at charleston-sc.gov.gov/BAR. No agenda item pending for us has been deferred or withdrawn as of right now. Friendly reminder to anyone present with us tonight to please turn off cell phones or other disruptive devices. And what I was saying earlier about your main comments, friendly reminder, particularly to any member of the public speaking tonight, that comments should be related to architecture and aesthetics and not issues such as zoning, parking, traffic, or lot coverage, or livability concerns, as those are not the purview of this board and therefore should not be part of our deliberations. And with that said, our first agenda item is the approval of minutes from our February 8th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Ms. Brown, second, Ms. Oka. All in favor of approving the minutes from February 8th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Agenda item number 2, demolition application for 40, 44, 46 North Market Street. Ms. Perry.
Yes, okay, so just a little bit of clarity on the addressing. The PMS number is related to 40 North Market, but the building that we'll be talking about is addressed as 44 and 46. So this thing is, again, on North Market Street. It's not rated. It's constructed in the 1940s. It's in the old and historic district. And the applicant is seeking final approval for partial demolition of the west structure containing the south facade. Showing you the location on North Market Street with the red outline there. This is the North Market elevation.
Good. Mr. Bellow.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Eddie Bello, Bello Garris Architects. Also have Nick Whitson here from our office, project architect. So I'll go through this quickly. This is a little bit unusual in that we're back in 2017. This project got approval for partial demolition, keeping the south facade and part of the north, sort of an old remnant of a wall. We're asking to keep the south facade again and tear down what's behind it. That heat paneled wall, and it's really, in our opinion, not contributory or keeping stuff. We just go through that. So I guess what I'm saying is a lot of this has already been approved, but the demolition has expired and we're reapproving for that. Next slide, please. So there was a historic sailor's home, tenement house, boarding house that has long since gone on the site in the early 1800s. Next slide. One on the right. Actually, both of these show the warehouse wholesale building that we're requesting demolition of. Next slide. So you can see here what's in red. This is an existing building. We're not doing anything to that. We're keeping this. Moving what's back behind it. Graphics showing there. So we had a site visit yesterday. Didn't know showed up except for me and Lawrence and Nick and Aaron. But it is inside. We can go show you some photographs. Next slide. Not a lot of historic fabric. Actually, this facade has been altered over the years. In the prior application back in 2016 by another architect, they did some exploratory work to see what was behind that facade. It's been altered a lot. I don't think there's the original openings. All of it's made of block, some historic brick, some new brick. Part of the building, you can see that bottom right photo, that is concrete block, the whole western wall. Again, we're keeping that south facade, and we have another project coming out to just talk about that then, but just that even the part we're keeping is not particularly historic. The form is, but the actual fabric is not very significant. Next slide. Just showing, if you haven't been out there, think a lot of people have lived through that around the market. And so this wall was asked to be kept because the architect was going to have a courtyard and this was going to be exposed. If you go back there, if you go to the side, much of this wall's already gone. There's a big opening here and another one here. So there's really just wall left. So we're asking for all that to go. Obviously, all this back here is not historic and doesn't contribute to the historic. There are not. Next, then got one or two. I go through these ones. Yeah. So what's already been approved, other than that little back wall, and I'll just take it.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. I'm going to borrow a cue from Mr. Metters, who's not with us here this evening. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak against the demolition of Wright? With the partial demolition, I should say. Any member of the public wishing to speak against? Okay.
Okay, thanks.
City staff comments or recommendations?
So 2 comments. Number 1, exploratory demo indicates that the south-facing wall is constructed differing materials of varying ages. Additionally, the presence of steel plates and lintels indicates that the existing openings may not be original to the origin of this building. And 2, similarly, the openings on the north wall do not appear to be historic based on the presence of steel lintels and concrete jambs. The masonry parapet wall, which may be the most interesting element of the facade, sits behind and is mostly hidden by an exterior wall added later. The stair tower is not original. We're recommending final approval for partial demolition of the structure at 44 to 46 North Market Street, containing the south facade.
I don't think there'll be any time. No. We'll move to board discussion on this agenda item, if any, or if not, a motion.
Motion to approve final approval of partial demolition.
There's a motion for final approval of the partial demolition pertaining to the south facade. Is there a second? Second from Ms. Sobchak. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Ms. Brown? Yeah. And myself, in favor. Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Thank you. That's good because I have half my class here.
Oh,
You know, it's really embarrassing.
You should have told us that.
approved it,
You
so.
should have told us that.
Y'all need to stick around for something good. Good stuff's coming now. All right, thank you.
All right, very good.
See y'all.
Moving right along, agenda item number 3, 49 King Street.
This one is Courier Square Phase 2, Building 2. It's in the Crandonboro and Elliottboro neighborhood, at Districts 4 and 6, and in the Old and Historic District. The request for preliminary approval for a 15-unit apartment building with ground floor retail. This is Courier Square 2, and the smaller outline is where Building 2 will be. What it looks like today. All right, we're ready for the applicant.
And for anyone who wasn't here earlier, that microphone is not really working this evening. These are. So if you just speak and enunciate clearly and everyone out there can hear you, you'll be fine.
I'll be very brief. Ben Lee's out with Great Star. We've gotten to know each other. We've been at this project for quite some time. Tonight's really about further iteration of building to refinement a whole lot. We think a whole next level of detail since the last presentation. So we're excited. Thanks for your patience as we take our time to really get this building and the rest of this community right. So I think Scott's going to say a few things. Turn it over to Gary. Or Gary first.
Yeah, either one. I think you're right. So, Lawrence, go forward a slide, if you don't mind. Yeah, right there. So, what we're doing from a site development and landscape point of view for this project, we're going to come to you one time for all of that work. When building 1, the large building, comes to you. So we certainly are here to answer any questions about what's happening with the site if you want, but it's really not a part of this application. It'll be submitted for one final, or one approval. So now it's you.
Gary?
That's all I have.
Gary Brewer. So the site, as you know, is on the corner of Line and King Street with a proposed alley to the south and a motor court to the west and a corner entry on the corner. And there are 5 units per floor. This is the roof of the tower and the mechanical set in the center with high parapets to conceal it from the pedestrian view. Next, please. So the BAR comments were sort of minimal. Basically studied the cornice and the tower further. Next, please. And these are the before and the proposed elevations facing King Street. So it is largely the same with a few development of details, but the biggest change is we are proposing to cap out the top of the tower with a sloped metal roof. And in an earlier scheme, and we had studied it a number of different ways, we had metal as part of the design, and the feeling was that the sloped roof look slightly taller and terminate the view on Line Street looking west from Meeting Street and on King Street looking south. Next, please. So here is the King Street elevation. I'll describe the materials later on, but we're basically proposing 3 colors of brick, a kind of darker brick, a brownish red brick, and then a red brick. We're using those 3 colors to pick out special brick details. There's a canopy, FRP canopy facing King Street, and that wraps around the tower. Next, please. And here are the close-up elevations and sections through the tower. The cornice is proposed to be FRP with a bracketed cornice at the bottom of it, and then here you can see the canopy that wraps the metal roof would be a standing seam, true standing seam roof. Next, please. And then this is a corner of the building showing the canopy and the same cornice, which we rendered in a sort of gray-green with brackets that will wrap around all sides of the building. And then the canopy would also be the same matching gray-green. The window, jack arches, and sills we would pick out in a precast in a sort of ready, reddish gray color along with the canopy. So this is the elevation at Line Street, the earlier, and the proposed on the bottom. Next. And then again, just carrying on the details that are developed on King Street all the way around the building. This side will also have retail and a canopy street, Line Street. Next, please. Here you can see in a large detail showing the brick pilasters with the darker brick and the 2 colors in the basket weave and the center of the pilasters. Next, please. And then the base detail with large storefront windows and then canopies to shade the pedestrian at the street. Next, please. We are also calling out a few unique details. At the parapet, we're proposing a decorative panel, very similar to what you see on many of the historic buildings on King Street that have metal panels with acroteria. And so we thought that that would be something nice to add to the building. And then at the spandrel panels, we're doing 3 colors of brick, and at the center of the proposing to use a marble, a white and gray and black marble as an inside. The windows are be proposed as a black and a gray with the brick marble. Next, please. So some of the details, we are also proposing metal rails at the balconies and the balconies. And the base of the building we're proposing to do in granite or black marble, which we think works with the color scheme of the building. And then moving around towards the motor court, the west, this is the side that has most of the balconies next to it. And so you can see in the middle, there is an inset balcony for the top 3 floors that is bracketed by brick. Here are elements on the right and the left, and then additive metal. And you can see that there is a pedestrian walk underneath the building. Addition to the building since it faces west, and there might be outdoor dining there next to it. And then these are some of the larger scale details of the pilasters and the metal balconies that will have metal round columns that will match the color at the top of the building next to it. And then sections through the balconies. And then finally, moving towards the alley, which is the south elevation that faces towards building number 1. So it is much the same as the other 3 sides next to it. And carrying around all of the similar details that we have on the other side. There is a canopy and awnings at pedestrian level that faces south with one of the main entries off of the alley, and the parking is mostly in the next please. Four elevations together. Next please. Sections. And then the material palette. So FRP insets and panels with a sort of gray, 2 colors of gray for the windows and the mullions. The painted metal balconies would be black. The parapet caps would be cast stone to match the color of the brick. We're proposing black and taupe and gray awnings, and then a belt course that's a lighter cast stone color between the and then the marble samples, and then on the bottom right you can see the 3 colors of brick with the black accent and the black water table, which is on granite. Next, please. And then this is the other side of the building that calls out all of the materials. And then details and materials for post-war. And then back to the site plan. Scott will come back for further development of that, but the thinking is that corner entry, we would probably have special paving, which would be stone and brick. Underneath the colonnade on the left-hand side, we would probably do the same upgraded materials. And then for the hardscape of the alley, there would be special paving there as well. Next. So this is the before and after perspective, which basically shows the character of the building not changing with the exception of the sloped roof. Next, please. Which we think is an important urban gesture because you will see it from Line and King. The idea of the sloped roof was to give it just a little bit of extra height.
Is there any member of the public who wishes to be heard on this agenda? Hearing none, city staff comments or recommendations?
Refinements include the reinstatement of a roof to the tower element, which gives this element a more finished appearance, a revised window grid, which seems more appropriate for the architectural language, and better proportions to the storefront windows. While ornate in design, the hard awnings feel very heavy, more notably where one wraps the corner tower element and should be restudied. 3, the board has shown a cautious stance on GFRP for durability, with a decided preference for GFRC. FRP cornices and other parts noted should be replaced with GFRC. GFRP should be limited to the vertical panel inserts noted on pages 26 to 28. And last, round column bases and capitals as shown on page 21 are oddly minimalistic and flat in appearance with a double astral form. Staff recommends a more traditional treatment of these columns. And then we are recommending preliminary approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Tori. Mr. Brewer, anyone else care to respond to the applicant?
Those are good comments. The only comment I would make is that we typically use FRP, and the board has approved FRP for past projects that we've done. We use it where we are trying to mimic the look of metal. And so there are, on this building, there's a number of green elements that we're proposing to be FRP, to be metal-like. And if we would change it to cast stone, I don't know if I could bring myself to do green cast stone. So, so that was the rationale of cast stone, GFRC, and FRP.
Okay. I follow that rationale. Okay. Very good. Board discussion.
I think it's nicely. I'm personally welcoming the detailing and analysis complements the Kingston. We established that. I agree with most. And yes, I was thinking about the metal. I saw the ruby metal corpus which is used to be steel, pretty much. So I don't know, we need to revisit that. Because again, if that's the approach, definitely finish is not going to work there. And you know, with all the development of the details, this fourth comment on first step about the columns is have a lot of details otherwise, and suddenly it's just sort of simplified at the bottom, at the pedestrian level. Other than that, I personally will move for the preliminary approval of this. Making a motion, I'm just
Saying which way you're headed.
yeah.
See? Very good. I applaud the applicant for putting in some excellent effort into the detail of these facades. We don't seem to get a ton of appreciation for that in larger scale projects, but the effort really does show both in terms of diversity of the materials that are being used and just the pattern of the facade. I think it's very pretty building. I'll leave it at that and agree with this board comments, except that Ms. Parrish cares to comment on Mr. Brewer's intent with the GFRP for Lawrence regarding that being in lieu of metal panels.
Yeah, I think our experience really is that it's not whether it's GFRP or GFRC, it's really ultimately the product itself. So I think if you can show us that you've got a good, durable, solid, long-lasting product that is FRP, that's fine.
Okay. Good. I think that kind of resolves that issue, so the durability of the material itself. Very good. Yes, Lewis.
Yeah, I guess it's preliminary approval before the step guidance.
Mr. Brown, you second? I did. Okay. Mr. Brown, how do you vote on this? Yeah. Ms. Ocho? Myself, yeah, in favor. Thank you to the applicant. Look forward to the project coming along.
Great, thank you for your help.
Agenda item number 4, 578 Union Street.
All right, 578 Main Street is a new construction project on the east side. Height districts are 3.5 and 5 historic corridor district. The applicant is requesting conceptual approval of an approximately 200 unit apartment building with live work program at ground level, central amenity space, and structured parking. Slide for you. Location, Regis Milk site, paving. And that's what it looks like today with that portion on the left being the site element. This is the in with West Corner. We're ready for the outlook.
Thanks, George. My name is Ross Kirby. I'm with Dynamic Design, the architect for the project. And before I get too far into the presentation, I'd like to request an extra 5-10 minutes. It's a fairly sizable project. We made some substantial changes to the scope, so we want to make sure we're able to cover all that in the depth. That's all right.
Sure. And then give you an additional 5 minutes and go through that.
Okay, thank you.
Do 5.
As far as wishing, this project is zoned for 5 stories for the first 120 feet of depth along Meeting Street and 3.5 stories along the rest of the portion of the site. We first presented this back in July of 2021, and at the time we were seeking an additional 6-story along the front and a full 4 stories on the back, and pursuing architectural merit for that. And in those previous iterations, most of the feedback we got was that the massing was too much, was not being respectful or treating the existing regional building in the way that was appropriate. And so what we did was we took a step back and went and partnered with LS3P and DesignWorks, and Brianna Deering and Christoph Germain here with me to walk through the presentation. And without going too far into the design, which we're going to go, the main thing we wanted to do was take the scope of the project and reduce it to a point where it can be designed within the envelope that's allowed by the zoning. So the major part of that is reducing the scope of the project from what was previously 235 units and a little more than 300 parking spaces that were all above grade and a parking deck, and reduce it down to about 200 units and 230 or so parking spaces, and take all that parking, we put it underground beneath the building, which is the biggest move we made architecturally speaking. And Brianna's going to go through and talk through exactly how we took the design from there. But those were the main moves we made to go back and try and readdress the main concerns that were brought to us from the board and staff and the preservation groups that we've been meeting with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brianna, who's going to run through the design presentation.
Ross, again, Brianna Deering with LS3P. Go ahead and go next. So just a brief refresher, to the north, we have Stewart Street, to the west, we have Meeting Street, to the south, we have Johnson, and then to the east, we have Nashville. As was mentioned, we've already received demo approval for this site, so that photo you see kind of in the middle to the right is what is being saved, so the historic remnant, or what will be referred to as the Regis. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the extent in plan of what that building looks like. So a front facade, 2 side walls, and then a little turn-back wing to the back. And then that current facade has existing filled-in brick recesses. Next. For this slide, ultimately, things to note is that we're majority in zone AE10, and with a 2-foot freeboard, that would put any residential units at elevation 12. Next. So as Ross mentioned, feedback that we heard from the board in our last presentation, which was a denial, was that overall the massing was too much and that there wasn't enough breathing room or respect to the Regis. So next. We buried the parking, which was the biggest factor in that large massing last time. Next. And ultimately we're left with essentially a blank slate. From there, we wanted to consider what should the organizing factor be on the site for a potential multi-building scheme. Next. So our zoning envelope is 5 stories along the Meeting, 3.5 stories towards the back of the site with a 120-foot setback. Next. So we went and took a look at the historic aspects of the site. We looked at the Sanborn maps and ultimately found that for the majority of the site's lifetime that was documented, there were 2 alleys running from Meeting Street to Nassau Street, Boland and Smith alleys. Next. And ultimately that historic Regis remnant was lined exactly with one of those previous alleys. So we thought that this would be a great factor to bring back into the site as an organizing element. Next. So you can see that zoning envelope with those potential alleys cutting through. Next. subtracted, we still felt that the Stewart Street mass warranted a little bit more breakdown in its length. So next, we extended one of the alleys to Stewart Street. Next. We still wanted Nassau Street to have more of an urban edge. So next, we brought that building to connect it. However, we still wanted that north alley to read along Nassau Street. So what we did is we are showing a hyphen in that Nassau building, and we are also lifting the bottom ground up. So we're providing a breezeway that would provide a peek into the alleyway. Next. We felt that there should still be a central hub for circulation throughout the site for residents. So we're providing a courtyard in the center. Next. From there, we still needed to deal with the half-story section on the back of the site. We felt that it was most appropriate to line the courtyard with that half-story. Next. What this did is it allowed the massing along the street edges to be minimized and more appropriately scaled. Next. We also wanted to respond to the Regis. That's a very important aspect of this project. So for that middle building, we set that facade back 25 feet. We provided a connector. We also, in the middle building, instead of building up to that full 5 stories, we set that 5th story back 80 feet from the property line to make it very minimal or almost non-existent from the street's edge. We also wanted the north and south buildings to genuflect to the Regis in the middle. So we provided a setback to also give more vertical proportions to those front massings. And what all of this did was really made the Regis feel like a remnant in the park-like setting. Next. As far as our facade organization, we focused on a concept of formal facades versus informal facades. So to us, that essentially meant, the city-facing aspects of the project wanted to lean more into traditional a little bit. So, brick punches with some brick relief. And then for the informal facade, which is what you're seeing highlighted in blue, more frame-like elements, a little bit classier aspects on the facade. Next. I'll turn it over to Christoph from DesignWorks for a little bit.
Hello, this is Christoph Drummond from DesignWorks. So you can see that on looking at the site plan right now, actually there's a lot more landscape and a lot more open space from the previous year with the 2 alleys and the Temple Stewart's space which will be dedicated to amenity. What's interesting also, like we mentioned, all the units are 12 elevation. And so what we did is actually we raised the alleyways, which are on top of the garage, at elevation 10. So what it does, it provides smaller stoops and smaller staircases, because all the units, which is great on the ground floor, except for 2 units, are actually accessible from the outside and not just from the corridor. So actually it creates life on the streets as well as on the alleyways that people coming in and out. The alley is at elevation 10, the units are at elevation 12. And also throughout the site, all the streets can be very different. Stewart is at elevation 7, so we have a much higher stoop, so about 9 steps, 4 feet of distance. While on Johnson, we only have a foot, the street, the sidewalk is at elevation 10, so we have basically 2 steps only to reach the units. Nassau will be more dedicated to service, much tighter right away. And this is where you're going to have the dumpster, the trash, the delivery, and the entrance to the garage. So you actually don't even realize there's a garage actually on the site. So because the beauty of it is even though the platform is 4 feet up on Stewart, what we did is on top of the platform in wrapping it up, we actually have the stoops, planters, and actually we use a lot of examples of Charleston frontier, the small raised gardens or higher planters, the lower ones, the turn stoops, and those kind of uses on the whole thing. What we did actually is interesting is on Stewart and Johnson, we actually provided parallel parking by moving away 2 feet the sidewalks towards the property. We moved also the building. You can see it's not actually against the property line, it's much further back, which allows us for 10-foot sidewalks plus the stoop and the landscapes. So we're actually showing some parallel parking on both streets. The other thing that I think is important to also see, as you can see, the planters are going to be raised inside the LSC on top of the garage. In order to plant trees, we have to raise them. But also we want to make kind of irregular and not linear. We didn't want to create a corridor. We want to corridor. You're going to see some renderings. We try to get diverse space in it, which allows for gathering or for sitting 2 person or 10 person. Every connection between the alleys is special. Next, what is really important actually on and what we want to focus on is really on Meeting Street. Meeting Street, the importance of that is actually all the units have working space on the ground floor, so the businesses, and they are at street level, so it's exactly, there's no ways to end. And also on either side of the ridges, we're creating two public plazas that will be open to the public, and on the north and south corners, we actually, due to the fact that the buildings are recessed, we're creating larger plaza and wider sidewalks in the corners, both dedicated to the public. For the rest of the site on the Stewart, Johnson, and Nassau are more dedicated just to the residential unit.
Ultimately, the architecture wanted to celebrate and emphasize the Regis historic remnant. So the design seeks to read of its own time while also referencing that remnant and its previous life as an industrial site. Next. Wanted that middle building to feel like a backdrop to the Regis. You can see here that the Regis has lots of breathing room on both sides with those public courtyards. We also wanted to breathe new life into the Regis itself. So you can see that those recessed brick panels that exist today are intended to be replaced with windows, providing light through that facade. The biggest element of that historic remnant is that stepped parapet, so we wanted to emphasize that as much as possible, and we did that in two ways. The building behind the Regis is more glazed than some of the other buildings on the site, so it's silhouetting that facade. Further, we are suggesting to paint those layers of the Regis in a gradient to further emphasize some verticality on the building and that feature of that stepping. Next. Also, just quickly want to mention that the Regis is planned to be the front door for the project.
Yeah, on this sketch, you can see very clearly the two plazas flanking either side of the Regis. Also some outdoor space for those working units for either tables, if there's a coffee shop in the space, or maybe some of the business showing outside. And you can see a set of 3 steps going into the alleys. So remember that the alley is actually elevation 10, the Meeting Street is elevation 9, so you have difference to the side. And also there will be a fence and gates and waste planters and alleys.
For the section through those courtyards, the connection from the Regis to that middle building in the back, we wanted to provide a glassy connection to make sure that it readed in contrast to the Regis. We're also, like I said, setting back that middle building 25 feet from the Regis facade, and then we'll also have a gate element between those public courtyards and then the private alleys. Next.
You can see on this illustration the special paving we're going to go inside. You see that it's having one type of material. This is just a place for finishing, and we have trees also to kind of bring that garden of the alleys out to the streets. You can see those few steps coming up, the planter. And well, we use a lot of precedent that we saw, around Charleston, the walls, columns, ironwork, landscaping, all that stuff basically is reminiscent of the tradition of Charleston gardens in a much more perhaps modern or contemporary way of doing it, but it still reminds you of what the big green in Charleston is about. Next.
When we were considering these alleys, we really wanted to look at precedents of alleys throughout Charleston and what the ideal width would be for the scales of these buildings. One benefit of pushing the buildings back from the Stewart and Johnson streets is that we can make that ideal alley width, because previously it could have been up to 30 feet or 40 feet wide. So we wanted to really provide the ideal alley width, which in our study we determined was 25 feet. These alleys are going to be lushly planted, and they are going to provide light and air throughout this complex.
And this is an illustration of what may happen in those alleys. And again, we talk about those raised planters, technically because of being on top of the garage, they need to be raised, but also at the same time, it softens the facade and then also create a much pleasant environment at pedestrian level. As you can see, they move actually throughout the side. They start and stops like where there are some planters, you can have a gathering space. This is actually the exit to that central building, which is basically a community center that you enter through the Regis basically. So actually the Regis becomes a doorway into that building. And then the planter becomes in the middle, with on the left side the private stoops to the private units, on the right side ceilings for the community center. So we can also create a hierarchy of space in terms of most public, most private. And again, I think the narrow alley is, with the heat we're having right now, this is going to be shaded space with cooling air. I mean, you can see that downtown when you go down an alleyway, it's always much cooler than the large streets. So the idea of those alleys, narrower, stories will actually be much more pleasant in the summertime than having a wide space open. Next. What we talked about also those corners. So since we have moved away the building from Stewart Street, we actually have allowed ourselves to have a much wider side. You can see finally dash line of the property line. If you had stuck to the property line, it would be almost a sidewalk and a corner. So by recessing the corner, what we would need is creating another space. We think about using some special paving as well, like we did on Tudor Plaza. And then the use of the planters in the landscapes also separate the privacy of the stoops from the public corner. So that you have a hierarchy again of space between the public and private and semi-private. And again, you can see the parallel parking and the 10-foot sidewalks that we're providing along the street. Next.
Ultimately, as we transition from that Meeting Street facade to the Stewart Street facade, you can see that contrast in the formal facade of the brick and that informal facade of the alleys. So at that 5th floor, we felt it was important to set it back so that it really felt more like 4 stories along the street edge. And then that also allowed us to bring that formal facade concept or informal facade concept down to the ground towards the Regis. And then those brick, vertically proportioned brick masses create a nice rhythm as you walk down Stewart. As you transition from that 5-story to that 3.5-story, you can see here that we still kept those vertically proportioned masses. We felt it was important to use the balconies as organizing elements and as relief on the facades to create a townhouse-like feel. And that also created a fine opportunity to bring in stoops for those residential units. Okay. You can see here that we have set back the facade, I believe it's 15 feet from Stewart Street. And again, like Christoph mentioned, Stewart has the most grade change at about 4 foot of stoop. Next.
That's the illustration of the way we want to treat the streetscapes. Since we have a 4-foot drop, those stoops are much taller. So the idea is also to use planters, and then this is the first try on maybe creating different heights actually. And as you go down, it goes up and down and changes as it goes. It won't be so linear for all the through, so it goes one block and changes further on. You can see the parallel parking added, the 10-foot sidewalk, and the turn of the stoop, which really kind of line up the hyphen. By doing those planters again, what we can do is also creating some trees and landscapes within those planters that also help decorate the facade and add on to the history of the facade in case of the beautiful street trees and lights on the street. Next.
As we travel further down Stewart Street, this is where you start to see that concept of bringing that alley outward towards Stewart to break up the masses. You can see that we're bringing that concept of that framing out towards the street to again provide some variety along Stewart. Next. As Christoph mentioned when discussing the site plan, the Nassau facade is really a hard-working facade for the site. It's housing the loading, trash, as well as the parking garage entry, but we still wanted it to feel residential. We thought that was important for that neighborhood. And so we provided some ins and outs on the facade to provide relief. We also brought balconies and stoops to this street as well. Next.
As you can see, the streetscape is much tighter here. The facade is closer to the property line, but we're still providing sidewalk and the stoops is actually a very traditional Charleston type of stoop with sidewalk staircase that you can see over Charleston. And we still wanted to provide some landscaping. So we still have low raised planters in this scenario with lower landscapes. And you can see actually the center, this is the hyphen that's actually the line with the alleys that goes all the way to Meeting Street. So it's also a grading space. And then you can see the gate on the right, and actually this is going to be used as one of the gates entrance to the complex, with the idea of uniform language on the lighting and the entrances that kind of match the rest of the building and use kind of some each one of those entrances.
We are studying, we don't want Stewart to just feel a little bit monotonous, so we are studying the idea of providing a separate brick color or potentially brick detailing down the line on the Nassau building, just so that we have more of that variety along that facade. Next. We also considered the importance of the church along Johnson Street. So what we have a 15-foot drainage easement along Johnson, but we also set the building back an additional 10 feet so that if you're looking from Meeting Street, you still see that the church has a major presence along Johnson Street. Another effect of putting that half story along the courtyard is that that mass along the street continues to step down towards the scale of the church. You can see here that what I meant of the 15-foot drainage easement along with that 10-foot additional setback, and then the difference in elevation along Johnson being between 1 and 2 feet with smaller stoops. Next.
There's a very different streetscapes as Brandon just mentioned. We are 25 feet away on the street, so you have a much wider sidewalk. And this, the beauty of it is actually the grass area is not on top of the garage, so we can plant trees in it, and we can also use grass and things add the street that can also give a wider public space on the front. This is 1 or 2 steps. We only need basically small plants or low planters. So again, very different streetscape on the other side, so we can make it and locate from all along the building. And change it as we go to the other side. Next. This is the corner basically on Johnson and Meeting. Same idea as the other corner, since we are recessed 25 feet. Actually, because we're actually further back than the other side, even at the planter for that small public space. So you kind of frame the corner as well and create a special place for that unique ground floor activities. Again, separation between the stoops with that small waste planter in the corner, so you kind of block your eyes and lead you actually to step a bit into the units inside. Wider sidewalks at the corner. Next.
Similarly to the look and feel of Stewart Street, Johnson Street follows that suit as well with a nice rhythm down the street. Next. Ultimately, our goal with the project was to create a design that was of its time, of its place, and humanly scaled. And we also wanted to really emphasize the Regis and give it its breathing space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Members of the public members of the public wishing to turn on this agenda. Mr. Schweber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'd like to thank the applicants for meeting with us multiple times well in advance of their submission of this application for conceptual review. We appreciate their willingness to collaborate in order to create a design that successfully incorporates the historic remnant of the Regis Mill plant. We feel that the assembly of the proposed massing and the architectural direction of the new buildings allows the historic structure to occupy a place of prominence at the entrance to this development and retain its presence along Meeting Street. This design team and the owners have faced 2 previous denials from this board, and instead of fighting the BAR process, has listened to the constructive recommendations of the board and adopted a totally new approach to their project that respects the character of this part of the city. Their efforts to incorporate the historic street grid as a means of breaking up the massing and footprint of their buildings is a laudable endeavor, and we feel has been executed successfully. The evolution of the programming along Nassau Street is also a notable improvement over the previous designs. This project is an example to future applicants on how to approach large format developments and how they can utilize the historic fabric of our city to create new creative ways to inspire new buildings that reflect Charleston's unique character. We look forward to working with the applicants as they continue to refine the architectural detailing through the preliminary process, and we recommend conceptual approval of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Schweber. Ms. Milligan.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with Preservation Society of Charleston. We would also like to thank the applicants for their continued communication on this project and walking us through recent changes to the design. After the last denial, we think the applicant has given significant consideration to feedback from the board and community on the project and come back with a thoughtful redesign. Given the site covers nearly an entire city block, we have consistently called for the project to have a multiple building approach. Breaking down the massing into separate footprints allows the development to better relate to the rhythm and character of Charleston's urban fabric and has put the project on a better path to move forward. Similarly, keeping the buildings within their height allowance is the right call for the scale of the surrounding context. We also feel the current design is much more refined and harmonious. Further activation at the ground level, including the multi-level planters and stoops along Stewart and Johnson streets, as well as the interior courtyards, are exciting to see incorporated into a new project of this size. However, there are a few areas we feel need further study. First, the primary central mass is sufficiently set back and respects the historic remnant. However, its dark skeletal design is a jarring contrast from the traditional language of the historic building. Because the architectural language of the new design matches the areas closest on the two buildings flanking it, it diminishes the effect of breaking up the masses because they all blend together. We feel the central mass should be studied with a more traditional and lighter material color palette, and that its form should have better compatibility with the Regis Milk facade. Second, while we are generally not opposed to the dark colored material serving as accents on the buildings, we are concerned by the south elevation of the rear building being treated almost entirely in dark fiber cement siding with very few window openings. The architectural language of this elevation seems to be a stark departure from the rest of the building and presents an unfriendly face directly to the neighbor at Greater Middleton AME Church. The architecture here should be softened to better respond to the neighborhood context. And finally, we are concerned by the prevalent use of fiber cement siding on buildings of these sizes, particularly from a maintenance and longevity standpoint, and feel a higher quality material should be studied in these areas. Given that aspects of height, scale, and mass are all at an appropriate starting place for the project, we are comfortable with a motion for conceptual approval, but urge the board to incorporate clear, specific conditions to restudy the architectural direction for the central, west massing, and rear south facade. Thank you.
Ms. Mooney, other members of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda. Seeing none, city staff comments or recommendations.
Okay, I shared with you all some staff notes, but I am going to read those for the public. So, the current proposal utilizes separate buildings connected by internal alleys that relate to previous thoroughfares seen on the same format. This scenario effectively divides the program into multiple buildings, places parking underground, and gives deference to the salvaged Regis Milk structure. Related to the remnant structure, the current proposal gives breathing room to the remnant. The material palette on the surrounding proposed new facades consists of metal and glass, which complement the masonry and opaqueness of the remnant. The paint proposal for the remnant structure enhances its deco styling. Regarding the proposed new buildings, the use of vertical masses separated by high vents with balconies makes for good proportions along the streetscape. The private entry, stairways, and planters also enhance and activate the streetscape. As proposed, there is a focused entry on Meeting and Nassau streets. Unless placing the parking underground is a huge benefit to the project, this means that no street will have exposed parking garage, and even more important, this means that no building mass is required to consume the parking garage with wrapped components, which can result in a large volume dictated by parking. All right, and then staff comments. Number one, restudy the 5th floor as proposed. This portion seems dark and heavy. Perhaps limiting the overhang will begin to minimize the perception. Alternatively, study extending the language of the exterior frame of the 5th floor. 2, at the 5th floor east elevation, also evident on the rendering from the corner of Thompson and Nassau Street, the brick should conclude in a more meaningful way, preferably continuing and wrapping under the 5th floor. 3, at the east facades of the 4th and 5th floors, revise the horizontal band of windows to be more consistent with other areas. The addition of a grid may help to resolve this concern. 4, suggest increased fenestration at the south elevation against the church for consistency with the remainder of the project. 5, provide views from further north and further south on Nassau to depict the visibility of the blank walls on the recessed 4th floor facades. And 6, at the south elevation behind the existing church, consider wrapping the brick exterior further west and encompass part of the 4-story portion. This will give more depth to the expression and eliminate the height between those building masses. All these comments I can address in page numbers if needed. And then the staff recommendation is conceptual approval with board and staff comments. And then one more note, I did get a note that there's on the live streaming, so I would just encourage us all, I should have said that before, but to speak up and speak clearly. Thank you.
We'll do so. For the benefit of the public who's watching us on YouTube, we have a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we will try to speak so that you can hear us. Does the applicant wish to respond to either public comment or city staff comments or recommendations? Sure.
These are great comments, and I think as we move forward, we will continue to study these elements. Just a note about the Nassau building's south elevation. Currently in the site plan, we have a really tight property line, which is why we are very small on the amount of windows. We can look to study if it's feasible to increase that window proportion moving forward, but just wanted to make a small note about that.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Board comments. I'm going to jump in first. to say that I am really impressed with what the applicant brought back to tonight. You have listened to the commentary about breaking up the massing, using the footprint of the alleys that were formerly there was a great idea that relied on actually looking back at the history of the site to come up with a creative solution to what we were asking for. I think there's just a world of difference. You've done what we asked you to do with deference to the Regis building. I think in regards to the central structure, it may be as simple as a color palette change that fixes that issue. But I think that in that regard, Preservation Society's comments regarding that particular portion are probably more considered. I'm very pleased with this project overall. I see the other elevations remind me of several facades I know of on King Meeting and Broad, much farther south. And one of the biggest things that's important to me, which the applicant expressly mentioned, is that there is some consideration of human scale, both in the activation of these streets and having a little bit of a setback. And although it's not really the purview of this board, I would just like to suggest that where it is possible, the underground parking solution, one where it's expensive, really is a solution. Look at all the things that it fixed with this frustration with the site plan. And I would agree that this is the new precedent for how you deal with a whole block development. We've just seen a good and creative way how to fix this particular problem. For the obvious, I think height, scale, and mass is appropriate. The general architectural direction is great, as with consideration and restudy of the things that staff and public comments brought up. Further board comments?
One thing on, this project is very long, very well progressed, and it's, like we said, it's another example of how Niles really helped to restudy this property and bring successful solution. I have a couple questions, and it's all about garage. Mechanical ventilation, you will have some, where it will be, is it internally
Yeah, so
or?
I'll start with that. So all of the mechanical ventilation for the deck will be internal. We have stairs and elevators within each building that tie all the way down to the parking in the subterranean area. So we'll have mechanical shafts that are paired up with those to go up to the roof from anywhere around the perimeter of the site.
No noise, movement. Okay. I also didn't see
Nassau side, so and kind of
is that
back to
through
the
the
site.
gate or is it internal ramp?
It's an
or-
internal ramp, so you come in and you'll ramp down immediately to the basement.
So again, the alley approach, that's kind of it for me, as far as the questions, but alley approach is really successful, and it's nice that you were able to find the historical that. I guess we all need to do that. More. So other than that, I will be brief. There's a sort of detailed comments from staff and really nice, good comments from both public entities. Yes, middle portion is still needs study, I think. And for me, it needs to be a little bit more connected to region than disconnected. And actually architecture, because right now, yes, we're emphasizing this little structures there, but we want to, I think we want to get more involved in the whole structure. So that's the color side. That's kind of progressive thing, so all can be worked out.
First, this is such an incredible improvement from the past presentation. The presentation was excellent. It made sense. everything that you all described from the historical context and how you're bringing that back to the forefront of this project. So like some of our organizations and what we set up here is that the process works, right? And we share a denial and get a completely different proposal, it moves in the right direction, and this certainly has done that. I actually appreciate the pushed back central portion away from the historic remnant and the design of it, even with the dark color. It allows the remnant to pop, if you will, and also kind of relates to the historical warehouse context that was previously there. I agree with city staff about the fifth level and it being somewhat heavy on the Main Street side. But I know that all of that is going to be restudied as well. And I'm glad to hear that the brick color or pattern on the Nassau Street side is going to be restudied. We didn't even have to bring that up. So overall, excellent job. And thank you for the work.
The world's difference in a project and a good project, which I think you should be proud of. That's great. All right. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve or motion to approve for consensual approval with board and staff comments.
There's a motion for approval incorporating board and staff comments. Got a second from Luda. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote?
In favor?
Ms. Brown?
Day in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you to the applicants.
Thank you.
Okay. And that concludes our agenda.
Class documents.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Okay, sure, I gotta get going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right next to the